The NFL's passer rating metric is a lie. In relevant samples, such as single games, it takes outlier performances of completion percentage, yards per attempt, touchdown percentage, and interception percentage, both good and bad, and implements artificial constraints that serve only to ensure inaccurate numbers will be incorporated into its complex formula. This is a mission to rectify the deceit by rejecting those arbitrary boundaries and utilizing actual, truthful passing numbers for individual games throughout the Super Bowl era, because, for instance, as to the worst games ever quarterbacked, said boundaries demonstrate an incredible amount of unearned, unjustified mercy. You or I could go take the field and try our hand playing quarterback against an NFL defense, and even if we spiked the ball or threw it toward a popcorn vendor in the stands on every snap we managed to successfully handle, our passer rating would artificially and baselessly depict our performance as 39.6 instead of the actual number of 2.1. 39.6 is high enough to be on par or better than the actual passer rating stemming from 2,145 individual games here. That means in the NFL's eyes, you or I are completely capable of outshining nearly 9% of all actual quarterback performances throughout the Super Bowl era. Or we could try throwing into the teeth of the defense, in the process surely throwing a bunch of picks. No matter how many we throw, the NFL won't let us sink below zero in terms of the number they provide to the American people, guaranteeing our performance to be displayed as on par with those produced by 19 NFL quarterbacks. But when we stop living in that fairy tale world, an avalanche of interceptions would mean our number should be far, far below zero, regardless of whether the quarterback is me, you, or, well, Dan Pastorini. Let's start by taking a plunge all the way down near -60, where our sweet, sweet caboose resides. October 9th, 1972, Dan Pastorini. A second-year player out of Santa Clara, Pastorini secured this season's starting gig in the wake of a preseason hip injury to friend of last episode, Lynn Dickey. Through 3 games, he performed totally adequately. But then came week 4. Of his 21 passes, 4 were completed to Oakland Raider opponents, surpassing the 3 he completed to Houston Oilers teammates for 31 yards, and, needless to say, 0 of which found the end zone. What's particularly funny is that his game so easily could have been so much worse. Let's celebrate such a special performance with a peek behind the curtain, especially because well over 4 of his passes were highly interceptable, requiring immense luck to contain the number even that low. Granted, there were instances when his targets did him no favors, like on his second pass of the game to Willie Rogers running a little Texas route. While Pastorini does put a bit of mustard on it, Rogers allows it to bounce off his shoulder and is spared a pick only when safety Jack Tatum drops the can of corn. And on the very next snap, he airmails his receiver, which Tatum again comes dangerously close to making a play on. Pass number 4 results in one of his 3 completions and the majority of his yardage on the day. And it comes on a screen thrown behind the line of scrimmage. Number 6 is another dropped pick by a safety, this time George Atkinson, already Pastorini's 3rd near interception. Although to be fair, I'm no ref, but I don't think this is legal. The Oilers start their next possession on Oakland's 2-yard line thanks to a blocked punt. Pastorini's not having much luck with his arm, so he tries his hand with his feet. That's a shame. A sack, overthrow, and blocked field goal later, the Oilers pull off the truly remarkable and rare feat of beginning a drive within 6 feet of pay dirt and coming away with 0 points. On Pastorini's 8th pass, his luck with Raiders failing to snag interceptions comes to an end, and from an unlikely source too, as defensive tackle Art Toms brilliantly deflects and hauls in the pick. Next pass, when Houston gets the ball back, Pastorini throws a beautiful ball right to cornerback Nehemiah Wilson, whose inability to hang on to the easy toss constitutes Dan's 4th near interception to go along with 1 actual interception. So on his next pass, he tries to balance the scales a bit by throwing directly to Phil Villapiano, who plays for the Raiders, for a 2nd actual pick. At halftime of this one, Pastorini's thrown 10 passes, completing 1 screen for 17 yards and supplemented by 2 picks and 4 near picks. On pass number 3 of half number 2, he finally registers non-screen completion number 1, albeit short of the sticks on 3rd down. But on the Oilers' next possession, surging with confidence after completing his first pass beyond the line of scrimmage, Pastorini caps a trick play by uncorking an absolute beauty that travels 65 yards in the air right into the breadbasket of Ken Burrow, who can't hang on to the dime. On his 15th pass, the lone Raiders starting defensive back who hasn't dropped a pick, Hall of Fame corner Willie Brown, drops a pick. Pastorini later completes his 3rd and final pass of the game, another screen, this time losing 5 yards. A couple attempts later, redemption for Oakland's secondary, as Atkinson ensures they'll actually hang on to a pick this time. Pastorini's very next and final pass of the game creates another magnificent relic when Art Tom's fellow D-tackle Otis Sistrunk joins him in plucking a deflection for a pick. So on a day in which all 4 of the Raiders' starting DBs managed to drop an interception, both starting defensive tackles were able to pick off Pastorini, which to this day appears to represent one of only 2 Super Bowl-era games in which a team had multiple interior linemen intercept a pass, joining Chargers' Norman Hand and Jamal Williams in a December '98 game in Seattle. I actually believe Pastorini only attempted 20 official passes in this game as opposed to the 21 that's on record, but regardless, before being mercifully yanked for his backup, who heroically picked up right where Dan left off, Pastorini recorded just 2 positive completions, one of which was a screen thrown behind the line of scrimmage, and the other of which was a fruitless 3rd down toss short of the sticks. That is juxtaposed against the 4 picks that were the driving force of his actual passer rating, which was the worst ever, even without accounting for not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 near picks. Now that is one special performance. Like most games toward the bottom, there were plays where his teammates dropped the ball, whether figuratively in protection or literally. Pastorini can also take solace in the fact that he's not exactly in his own solar system here. 3 years later, Joe Namath and old Dorktown friend Kim McQuilkin tried their best to take his crown, but found it just barely insurmountable. Some of you may be familiar with McQuilkin, specifically as to that November 9th, 1975 ballgame when he was devoured by the Vikings' vaunted Purple People Eaters defense, more on them in a sec, and which featured multiple of what I like to call surplus interceptions beyond the point at which his artificial passer rating was already 0. Well, if everything were accurately reflected, it wouldn't be 0. It would be down here at negative 55.1. So that's the good news for Pastorini, peers in his vicinity. But I'm afraid I do have some bad news for Dan. What makes this performance, the all-time regular season nadir, stand out is that its author also found time 6 years later to craft the all-time postseason nadir while in Pittsburgh for the '78 AFC Championship game. 2 masterpieces of the highest order. Thanks to tossing gifts to the Steelers 5 times, constituting more than 19% of his passes, or in other words, more than double passer rating's upper artificial constraint for interception rate, Pastorini's actual passer rating from that game is nearly 25 points below 0. But his artificial passer rating, like the other 1,032 eligible entrants here when isolating just the postseason, wasn't even as low as 0, owing to having cleared the minimum artificial barriers in completion percentage and yards per attempt. Among those artificially inflated to the positives, but in actuality are submerged below 0, are these 9 fellas. 8 of the 9, Caboose Pastorini, along with Mike Phipps, Jay Schrader, Richard Todd, David Woodley, Mark Vlasic, and multiple USC Trojans Todd Marinovich and Bill Nelson, had careers that were by and large thoroughly and remarkably unremarkable. By some heavenly miracle, those efforts manufactured by Todd and Woodley actually occurred in the same game, 1982's AFC title bout. My uncle scored a free ticket to that barn burner. He did not get his money's worth. However, the 9th, this guy right here with the second worst all-time postseason performance, that's future first ballot Hall of Famer Roger Staubach in the midst of his prime. Granted, Staubach was facing those purple people eaters, and it didn't start out on that kind of trajectory. He certainly played real poorly in the first half, though he'd at least taken care of the ball. But within his first 11 passes of the second half, he found time to cram in not just this interception to Bobby Bryant, not just this second interception that bounced off his tight end's hand and into those of Jeff Seaman, not just this third interception, again to Bryant, this time punctuated with a stroll to the end zone, but a fourth interception that Jeff Wright snagged off a deflection as the Vikes D generated a takeaway for a 7th consecutive Cowboys possession. That rapid 4-pick flurry sent the actual passer rating of the otherwise legendary quarterback spiraling down nearly 20 points below zero in perhaps the most pitiful performance ever put forth in any game by a quarterback of his ilk until 42 years later. With the wheels falling off in the final regular season start of his career, the ghost of the great Peyton Manning, the same man who once posted what was at the time the highest actual passer rating in a regular season game of the post-merger era, in addition to the most pristine playoff game to this day, pooped the bed. He'd go on to ride his defense's coattails to a Super Bowl winning ride into the sunset, but not without the stain of that stinker, which yielded an actual passer rating under -53, when no one else has even breached -40 since McQuilkin 40 years prior. In fact, in the 20-plus years since this Tim Hasselbeck disaster, Manning generated the only game that dropped as many as 25 points below zero. So the same man who reached peaks almost no one else has, also reached a valley almost no one else has, and that no one else in his era even approached. Failing to outperform the bare minimum standards in each of the 4 metrics, that put his artificial passer rating at 0. While I'm loath to give much oxygen to the smaller sample lies, I'll make an exception here because it does give us a fun memento. For some context on how rare that 0 is, after Jeff Garcia pulled it off in an 0-4 game, Manning is the only starting quarterback who's done so since. And through the first 58 years of the Super Bowl era, as mentioned earlier, Peyton's one of just 19 quarterbacks to pull off the artificial goose egg in a game. One of the other 18? Why, that'd be none other than Lynn Dickey. The guy with whom Manning formed a 2-man pantheon of regular season and postseason heights also joins him in an extremely exclusive club on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. Peyton Manning and Lynn Dickey, as odd a couple to apparently be inextricably linked as you will ever see. As for the 178 games played by quarterbacks that in actuality reside in sub-zero land, 2 guys lead the way with 5 such outings apiece. One of whom is former Patriot Steve Grogan, the other of whom is former Steelers 4-time Super Bowl champion and first ballot Hall of Famer Terry Bradshaw. Now that we've ditched the lies and thoroughly explored the best stuff from both the best and the worst quarterback games through the proper, truthful lens of actual passer rating, in the final episode we'll take a look at some alternative perspectives, as well as a big picture look at the metric and how it could perhaps be further improved beyond the dismantling of the artificial boundaries. Thanks for watching Secret Base. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you want to get a peek at even more stuff and see your name included alongside all these other very smart and good-looking people, subscribe to Secret Base on Patreon.